Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gardner Institute Redesigning History Gateway Courses webinar today. My name is Susanna McGowan. I am a fellow with the Gardner Institute, and my day job is the Associate Director for Curriculum Design at Georgetown University, and I'm speaking to you from Alexandria, Virginia. I just wanted to go over our agenda for our time together today. We're going to do introductions from my colleagues from the Gardner Institute as well as from New American History. Then we're going to have Ed Ayers and Drew Koch describe the charge for what we're doing today and the purpose for why we're all here. My colleague Steph Foote will explain the course design principles and equity-based model that we abide by at the Gardner Institute. Then we'll break up into small group conversations, which will always produces some sort of interesting technical challenge, so bear with us, and we just ask you for your patience and sense of humor as we try the small group conversations. And then we'll bring it back to have a large group discussion as well as discuss next steps beyond the webinar. So again, my name is Susanna McGowan, and I'd like for my colleagues to also introduce themselves at this point, starting with Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Foote, or Steph, from the Gardner Institute, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Teaching, Learning, and Evidence-Based Practices, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here with you all this afternoon and to learn along with you.
Peter?
Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Felton. I am a professor of history at Elon University and assistant provost for teaching and learning, and I am a fellow of the Gardner Institute also. Happy to be here.
Peter, thanks. My name is Drew Koch, and I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer here at the John M. Gardner Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education. It is also my pleasure to be joining you today. It's also my pleasure on the next slide to share a little bit about, oops, no, it's not. I got our New American History team in. So Suzanne, I cede it back to you.
Thanks, Drew. And I'd like to welcome our colleagues in this endeavor from the New American History Project. I'll start with Ed Ayers, who will introduce himself. Ed, you're on mute. I'm so sorry.
I've only done this for 400 hours. I'm still Ed Ayers, President Emeritus and Professor of History at the University of Richmond and Executive Director of the New American History Project that I'll talk about a little bit later. Thanks.
Thank you. Annie?
Hi, I'm Annie Evans. I am the Director of Education and Outreach with New American History.
Annie just froze, I believe. She warned us that she has technical difficulties, so we will proceed and hopefully she'll join us again if this happens. And it's also Friday. And then we also have Tony Field.
I'm Tony Field. I'm the editor of Bunk, which is one of New American History's flagship projects.
And I will just say that, thank you, Tony and Ed, and I'll say that Annie is the Director of Education Outreach with the New American History, and she's a fantastic colleague, and she's coming back. Do you want to try again, Annie, just to say hello? If you unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear better?
Yes.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies, folks, having apparently some technical difficulties, but I'm Annie Evans. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach with New American History. So my job is to develop new learning resources and to work with K-16 teachers. And I'm really happy to be learning with you today.
Great, thank you so much, Annie. And I'll also say that we're really happy to see you all on a Friday afternoon. We made it through another week. And so we're really fortunate to be together today to talk about something other than what we're doing on a daily basis in Zoom or WebEx. So I'm going to pass it to Ed and Drew, who are going to speak to the overall purpose for why we're together today.
Susanna, thank you. This is Drew Koch again. I was so excited to tell you about our charge and what this number means that I almost cut my New American History colleagues off in the process, but having allowed them their opportunity to introduce themselves, I am going to jump in right now and tell you why I'm excited about this, and particularly this number. As we've been working on this project, as you know from some of the homework, the previewing and pre-reading has been 3-4 years in the making, at least between the Gardner Institute and the New American History folks, much longer for the New American History colleagues. We said, we have the nation's birthday coming up in 2026, and it's 250 years. That's not a minor thing. So we thought, as we were thinking about how history is a living thing, and we're going to be living our nation's 250th birthday, that in honor of that birthday, we would set out to focus on redesign using some really cool and really accessible digital scholarship and digital learning tools in at least 250 history courses, enrolling, from our estimate, about 25,000 students in time for the nation's 250th birthday. The cool thing about it is that we have about 40 faculty in this inaugural group. You're the vanguard group, the first amongst equals, if you will, learning and sort of accepting this challenge and charge. I emphasize that term learning because we're gonna learn from and with you how we can continue to do this better, right? This is our first time doing this with an initiative like this in the post-secondary realm. So we're excited about it. We're excited about undertaking this charge with you. Our hope is that you do this in one of your courses, and then we'll be 250th of the way there. But with many hands, this will be lighter work, and we look forward to working on this with you, to realizing more equitable outcomes in history courses, American history courses in particular, and to really engaging with you as we are engaged in this project. Now, to tell you a little more about this project, I'm going to turn it over to our colleague and friend, Ed Ayers. Ed?
Thanks, Drew, and thanks, everybody. It's really exciting for us to have a chance to be associated with such a charge and such a mission because we imagined the New American History Project as a tool for equity, to put tools that are flexible and scalable in the hands of the people who know what to do with them, who are the people who teach history. The post-secondary element of all this is particularly exciting. I taught the second half of the U.S. survey, as we all call it, for many years. And I know the challenges of that. Students coming from so many different backgrounds, so many points of contact with history. So we've actually tried to create a suite of tools that replicates that diversity. So we have 4 different tool sets, one that Peter will be talking about with American Panorama, a set of digital really beautiful interactive maps, Bunk, which is a real-time curation of representations of the American past in all media every day. Backstory, a podcast of 12 years now that explores American history behind the headlines, as we say, and The Future of America's Past, a new PBS TV series that goes to the history's front lines to see how people are interpreting hard things from the past. So our idea is that every class, every teacher will know how to combine these in the ways that make the most sense for her or his class. So thank you so much for joining us today. As Drew says, we look forward to learning from you, to hearing your impressions, and we're going to keep making more New American history. So we'll look forward to your guidance as we do so.
Wonderful, thank you. So now we're going to shift gears, now that we've talked a little bit about our purpose, and talk about how we might achieve this purpose in thinking about our courses and shaping our courses through the course design model that we espouse at the Gardner Institute. And so Steph, my colleague Steph, is going to explain the model for us.
Sure, thank you so much, Susanna. So at the Gardner Institute, and in particular in our Teaching and Learning Academy, with which a number of you are familiar because you've been involved and engaged in our work, many of you through the History Gateways project. We use this model, we refer to it as the equity and evidence-based teaching model, and it's a model that we put together. It's been an evolution for a couple of years now. It's certainly not perfected, but it's something that, that we feel is an important framework from which to approach this work and to really ground the work. So the first thing that we do in all of our processes, but in particular when we think about course redesign, is to draft goals and to use evidence to really identify the goals that we're setting in our individual courses. So as you become more familiar with the tools that Ed has described, that you'll have an opportunity to really examine and think about incorporating into your classes. You want to set goals, identify goals that are informed by evidence, but also take into consideration the ways in which you might incorporate the tools to achieve those goals. So that's the first step. You are becoming familiar with the relevant evidence and resources through this process. The resources that we're sharing today, American Panorama and Bunk 2.0, are just a couple of the digital tools and other resources that you might use in your course redesign. But as we said earlier, we want you to think about incorporating these into at least one of the history courses you're teaching for this coming year. Then drafting a plan is important. I know from my own personal experience that that's one of the most critical aspects of this work, because that's where you make a commitment to all of this. So you've identified some things that you want to work toward, tools that you might use to accomplish those goals, and then you put it into a plan that you would then actualize. And the approach that we recommend in the Teaching and Learning Academy is that you think about implementing a few goals at a time, maybe. So it's not a good idea to do everything all at once, but rather to take a measured approach and to be iterative in this process, because it's important to gather evidence and understand what's working and what's not working. So that's very important to this process. Then finalizing your plan, teaching those redesigned sections, and collecting and analyzing the data. And as I mentioned, this is an iterative process. So we would expect you to revisit it, because maybe there are things that you learn along the way about your students, particularly in this time. For example, some of them may not have equal access to internet, to Wi-Fi, to be able to access the resources, the digital tools, in the ways in which we might expect. So there are things that we'll learn along the way with each other that will cause us to make changes and to continue in this process, again, with the intent that we would incorporate the tools and toward the goal of creating more just outcomes in our courses. So now I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and he's going to share some examples of this work. Oh, Susanna, did you want me to talk about these two first?
Thanks, Steph. I'll just mention that we're, for today, we're just going to think about the first two steps that Steph outlined in terms of thinking about our goals for student learning as a touch point for what we might do with the resources that Ed and Steph mentioned. And if you're familiar with the Teaching and Learning Academy process, these are questions that we used last year when we met at the Teaching and Learning Academy, and how we prompted everyone in the room to think about what are some starting points for thinking about historical thinking and thinking about the skills we want students to develop, as well as what are the resources that will support students to develop those skills, and what are the assessments and assignments that we can devise to lead our students along this particular path. So we're going to start with those two things in mind, and now Peter is going to describe a particular example.
Yes, a particular example using Bunk. But Susanna, why don't you flip back one slide, and I'll use that as the starting point. So hi again, everybody. Again, my name is Peter Felton. I teach history at Elon University, 7,000 undergraduate, private, fairly selective institution, but we still have issues around equity, like every place. And what I found especially in my often first-year history courses, is some of the students come in quite skilled and capable and ready to write history essays at the college level, and some students aren't quite as ready. And what I realized, partly by working through the Gardner Institute process, is that sometimes my final grades reflected their incoming proficiency more than anything else. And I was not really comfortable giving out grades based on your high school background. I wanted the grades to demonstrate that all of my students had learned the skills and the knowledge that they needed to. So the goals that I'm going to describe here are for a course I would teach. Ed called it the second half of the U.S. History Survey, which I called it most of my career until history enrollments tanked. And at Elon, we have changed the name from that to Contested Democracy, America from 1865. And believe it or not, enrollments have gone up somewhat. So who knows what can happen with wording. And my goals, just as you might have guessed from what I said, I have some goals around helping my students learn to reason and argue historically. some goals related to that around using primary source evidence. So using the kinds of evidence historians use to make arguments. And then a third and related goal is around just high quality writing and helping my students become stronger writers in the course. Okay, so those are my goals here. Now the evidence and the resources, Susanna, if you could just flip to the next slide. If I wanted to use New American History resources, which I do, and I want to use, I really am infatuated with American Panorama. So it's a rich, rich set of maps that have, on the one I'm going to show you, if you flip to the next one, Susanna, has census data of American foreign-born population from the 1850 census through the 2010 census by county in the United States. And it's pretty magical what you can do with this. And so thinking about my goals and thinking about my students and thinking about what it means for me to teach this class, I'll often have, I'm fortunate, we have relatively small classes, but I often have 30 students in a class. And one of the things I've learned over the years is the more I can have them working with each other or doing work I can give quick feedback on rather than detailed graded feedback, the happier they are, the happier I am. And the more I can have them practicing skills, the more likely they are to be successful when it comes times for the high stakes assessment. So what I'm gonna show you is something I adapted from our history colleague, Laura Westhoff at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. I think it's just a brilliant 4-step sequence of exercises. I would do this typically in contested democracy in this course toward the end of the semester when we're talking about 1960s, 1970s, 1980s US history. But I want my students also looking back at the same time. So we sort of build chronologically, and I try to keep things fairly comprehensive. So again, my goals are about helping my students become more proficient in making arguments and using primary source evidence and practicing their writing skills. So this is a 4-step exercise. I would do it in typically 3 weeks. So once or twice a week, they do one of these. The first thing they would do, and this is when I would introduce this foreign-born population tool, is I would have students in groups. They've typically worked in groups several times during the semester. I'd want at least one person in the group to have a laptop. I'd get them to that foreign-born site and give them class activity number 1, which is drill into a county. They could pick any county they want. I usually suggest they pick one of their home counties because they have some connection to it. And look at 3 moments in time, 1870, 1920, 1970. It would be awesome if they looked all the way across, but we don't have that much time in class. And then to think about what's there and to draft and write out 3 different thesis statements that they could make they could use to frame an essay, drawing on that county and what happened with foreign-born population over that period of time. And then they email me those, and I post some of them up onto the screen, and we talk about the quality of the thesis statements, and we talk about what they found. It's a fascinating conversation. That exercise might take half an hour. And then the second step, sometimes the next class meeting, sometimes a class meeting after that. I've got things in my way, just a second, is to ask each student on their own. Well, and notice in the class activity, I don't give any grades or anything else. I just say you guys did great or work on your thesis statements. The second activity, ask them to write a thesis statement and an intro paragraph drawing on a different county. So they're doing and actually looking throughout that period, 1870 to 1970. So they're going more deeply into the source. They're using a somewhat different data set, and they're having to write on their own. They're only having to write 1 here. And then what I do is I give them quick feedback on that. So that's graded, but very lightly. But it's building towards something. So Susanna, if you could do the next slide, please. Then it builds towards an individual assignment. Laura Westhoff taught me this, and I think it's really, really clever, of giving students 2 intro paragraphs that I write, drawing on particular counties, and then ask them to complete the essays, right? So they have what ought to be a clear and strong introduction and thesis statement. And the question is, can they then, with that, practice the skills of writing a strong essay? And then the final step, and again, I grade that fairly lightly. I actually have peers read that when the day they're going to turn it in and give each other feedback. It's a great experience for all of them, and it helps me be quick in my feedback. And then the last is just, all my essays are take-home essays. And so I have them write an essay that draws broadly on what we've been reading and talking about in class and on the foreign-born population maps. And what I've found is by doing this sequence is all of their essays are better than they used to be, because all of them have more practice with the discrete steps of doing this kind of activity. So that's the activity as I would do it. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but if not, Tony was going to talk about a couple ways we might use American Panorama and Bunk to deepen this kind of exercise or expand it.
Tony, do you want me to unshare my screen? Or are you gonna, do you want to share?
Why don't I just talk about this? I'm actually not prepared to share my screen right at this moment, but would be happy to follow up on any questions, if there are any questions right now. To Peter's goal of helping students to become stronger writers and stronger creators of historically based arguments. You know, Bunk, which I edit, is actually quite well positioned to be used as a tool to sort of further that goal, or to try to achieve that goal. Bunk right now consists of about 5,000 individual pieces of content that we've curated from all over the web over the past 3 years since Bunk launched. Bunk was created to be a shared home for what we decide, for a variety of reasons, to be the most interesting history-related writing, but also other sorts of digital content being published every day online, in essence, to represent the way that the past is being represented in real time. We source from several hundred different publications. Some are more represented than others. I'd say that what almost all of that content shares is that it is written to be readable by a broad audience. There is some scholarly work written by scholars for other scholars, but the majority of it is not. It is written for a general audience. So we look for readability, we look for everything else that we'd look for in a scholarly argument. So I'll briefly say that to speak to Peter's example, if you were working on the theme of foreign-born population for any of those 3 years, you could find that map in Bunk by using our brand new search function, and then look at the connections that the site would direct you to. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate this. I think you'll find it under foreign-born population, which is the name of the map itself. Oh, I see it as the third item right there. You'll see when this map comes up that Bunk is designed to showcase connections that are thematic. And in a moment, we'll see, you'll see there are 12 connections that are off to the side. That this is one of them. The other icons that you can see right now that are sort of grayed out show that we also highlight other sorts of connections. These are person-based connections, and the next one would be place-based connections, and then finally we have time. So the site sort of showcases connections on theme, person, place, and time. And the time connection allows students or any users of Bunk to explore both forward in time and backwards in time. So you can see how if you were looking at immigration patterns or stories about immigration patterns in 1920, the site would be a useful tool for exploring similar themes in both earlier and later periods. So Bunk is I think, the New American History, we believe, a great tool for people who are interested in connecting with current events, in using material that is designed to be read and represents good scholarship as well.
Great, thanks, Tony. I did my best to follow your narrative and navigate the website as well, but we wanted to make sure that everybody could see the link here if you haven't had a chance to look at these amazing set of resources before you got here today. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to our presentation. Okay. So now we're going to ask that we're going to break out into small groups. And in order to do so, we're going to have a discussion around how these resources could support some of your course designs. We'll talk about goals. We'll talk about there's also how you're doing and how you're doing in this semester at this point in time. And in order to, yes, so Ethan has provided a link in the chat window. We also can use this link and add this meeting ID to once you get to zoom.us. So this means we're all going to leave this current Zoom room and we're going to move to another Zoom room. So we'll see you in the breakout rooms.